morning, everybody. How you doing?
Good. Good. How are you?
Good. Very good. Thank you. My name is Ray Pfister. Not spelled with a P, just so you know. Not that that matters. For those of you Milwaukeeans here, how many are from Milwaukee or out of state? One. Oh wow, cool. I run Fifth Floor Recording Company, which is in Milwaukee's historic Third Ward, which is basically like a warehouse district. For those of you who are familiar with it, it is a small, very small production house. I've owned the studio for 24 years, as of last August, and so next year, 25. And my primary work, it's fairly broad, post-production, obviously, which is what we're talking about. A lot of voice tracking, sweetening picture, that could be to film, that could be to industrial video, commercials, which is my primary work. You could technically say, and don't throw anything at me, that I'm sort of in advertising, so don't hurt me. So, and really anything. I mean, in my business and what I do, if somebody comes to me with a micro cassette, I transfer it. Somebody comes in, if there's an actor that comes into town that needs to do some tracking with somebody via, well, we used to do ISDN, now we do Source Connect, I do that too. So, and everything in between. Excuse me. Sorry, I didn't mean to. Sorry. So anyway, thank you for having me here today. Hopefully I can answer questions for people more than anything else. I'll try and keep my talking to a minimum. And anybody who knows me, nobody does in this room, thank God, I can talk. Interesting thing, this weekend I just got back Monday from Las Vegas. And my girlfriend and I went there, half business and half rest and relaxation, which there's no such thing there. And we saw the Beatles' Love show, which I've seen already. We also saw the Michael Jackson 1 show. Both are by Cirque du Soleil. I'm sure you're all familiar with them. And as a guy that's in a technical business, to see these shows, I think a lot of us might be a little jaded from time to time when you see certain kinds of productions. These are the things that make me go down to about 2 inches. I shrink. I'm just so humbled by these technicians, by these people who are behind the scenes. The work they do, and it's just, there's no words, especially as much as I've seen Love a couple times now, the Jackson thing. I'm not a fan of his, and I was just knocked over by it. I just was amazed. So, that being said, a couple years ago, it was 2018, I was very lucky to visit the place I dreamed of visiting, which was Abbey Road Studios in England, and go to a conference there, which was held by a couple of guys who wrote a book called Recording the Beatles. And it's a spectacular book with every imaginable detail, every bit of equipment, everything you could want to know about what it took to create those brilliant records. And here I am in Studio 2, the room where this magic took place. And I'm sitting in my chair with a couple of hundred other people, just like you guys were sitting in the other room, and waiting for these guys to talk, and I'm just wanting to breathe the air. And I'm looking down. I even took a picture of the floor with my sandals on because I thought, it's a parquet floor. I'm thinking, I wonder if there's any ashes still left on the floor from John Lennon's cigarettes. I bet you there is. I want to dream that. So the two gentlemen got up there to give their talk, which was about an hour and a half long. And the first thing that happened was their microphones didn't work. It was a brilliant moment for me as an audio guy. Of course, everybody broke out laughing. And I thought, this is perfect. We are in the #1 recording studio, in the room where it all happened, and the mics didn't work. And I thought, well, that didn't make me feel too bad. We've all had those moments where gear doesn't cooperate, and all you do is try and punt, right? So, my talk is about post-production, and again, a lot of the work I do is sweetening, as I said, a lot of voice tracking, trying to fix things when there are problems, and that was a really good example, and I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
Paul.
Paul. My brother's name is Paul. If I had a nickel for every time somebody shot in front of a fireplace, I'd be a millionaire. And I'm sure a lot of you had to deal with that after the fact. And same thing, near water, near extraneous noises, near airplanes. And a lot of these problems can be solved fairly easily. One thing's nice is, in terms of technology, well, first of all, I work in Pro Tools. Does anybody work in Pro Tools in this room at all? Or Logic? Okay. For me, Pro Tools is, I started in tape. Let me go back for a moment there. I've been an engineer for 43 years. And so I go back to the days of razor blades and all that. And I don't miss tape. I don't miss rewinding. I don't miss any. I do miss the smell of tape. There was something cool about that when you were around a 24-track machine. But I admit that there are things that are pretty magical I can do with Pro Tools. And the key to that is editing, which is my favorite part of what I do. But the tools I have at my fingertips are just stunning. You know, years ago, somebody would come to me with a piece of distorted audio and say, can you fix this? Fix this? And I'd look at them like, did you just get off a spaceship? If you burned it, it's no good. I don't have to do that anymore. If any of you have ever heard of the program called Isotope? It's a brilliant program. I mean, I've taken some really nasty stuff and run it through this program and just sat there with my jaw on the ground going, well, okay, this can do it. So there are ways we can save this stuff now, which of course further puts us under pressure. I'm gonna go get water, sorry. Puts us under a little more pressure to be able to fix problems. But I've used it often. I do a lot of phone patch recordings. Are you familiar with phone patch recordings at all? Okay.
No.
Phone patch recordings are where we're connected through a device called a Telos device. You guys are probably familiar with Telos, right?
No.
Okay. No? Okay. Telos is a company out of my hometown of Cleveland. The president of that company is a guy I went to college with, which I'm like, wow, he did pretty well. Telos carries communication devices for radio, television, phone patch, ISDN. ISDN used to be a thing we used to communicate with studios anywhere in the world in real time audio. So in other words, I could be recording somebody in my studio that's in China, in Michigan, Chicago, which we did a lot of, and they sound exactly like they're in the room. In fact, first time I started doing it back in the late 90s, it was kind of spooky because you'd be talking to an engineer, possibly another producer, that kind of thing. Now we use a thing called Source Connect. Source Connect is operated through the internet. And in the beginning, Source Connect wasn't that great, and now it's every bit as good as ISDN. So, in fact, for anybody who listens to football games in the past, those games are usually run through ISDN to radio stations. So they go from, for example, here in Wisconsin, the Green Bay games run through ISDN to a radio station down here in town, and these were run through phone lines. Phone companies have been wanting to get rid of these lines for years, so we don't do that anymore. So anyway, what was I talking about? Isotope. Isotope can take out cracks and pops. I do a lot of phone recordings, and occasionally you get people who are just a little bit heavy on the phone, or you get a bad connection. You run it through the isotope function, and it will just simply eliminate them. It's, again, it's a jaw-dropping moment. You can eliminate hiss, just like noise reduction, like Dolby used to do. What else can it take out? Low-frequency hums. It can take out just about anything. It's really fun to work with, worth looking into if you're doing any audio posts. I don't know how often you guys get to do audio posts, but usually it gets tossed off to a guy like me, and I have to go through it and see where it goes from there. So, but you know, often something like this, recording in front of a waterfall or something like that, and you've got no choice but to live with it, especially when you've got edited pieces. More often than not, I'll just bring in another waterfall as a sound effect from Wild Sound and just cover it up. Same thing goes for airplanes. I'm sure you guys have done this before, where you get an airplane flying over when maybe you're doing an interview with somebody. And again, I don't know exactly what all of you do.
Video production,
Thanks.
audio.
Video production.
Okay. In town, or where are you guys from?
I work for the city of Depeer.
Oh, cool.
West Bend.
Great, great. So you bring in a plane to cover it. In other words, you ramp in a plane before the effect and you ramp one out to cover up edits. If everybody follows me on that. For me, my love as an engineer is editing. I love to edit. I love, and my arrogance to impress me. I like to be able to turn around and do something that they don't think I can do. And it's gratifying because we're behind the curtain, right? So that little victory means you'll probably win the war, hopefully, in the end. One of my favorite stories is, I have to see if I can get this right. I had a client who was a small advertising agency. Her husband was a voice talent who I'd worked with numerous times. And we had done a bunch of on-hold messages for a company, and one was incorrect, so I had to come in and revise it. Her husband is the male voice talent, plus they had a female voice talent. He didn't charge her for his services, but of course the female did charge. They come in to fix it, they realized they made a mistake again because it wasn't the male that had to be fixed, it was the female that had to be fixed. They had to change a line, to change a word, it was something, I don't remember what it was. And they played it for me, and they're all kind of upset, thinking, well, we're going to have to pay another $400, $300, whatever, to bring her in to fix it. And I listened to it, and I go, oh, no, I can fix that. It's not a problem. And they said, oh, no, you can't fix that. It's not a good thing to say to somebody when it's just throwing a challenge down. And it actually kind of irked me a little bit. It's like, yeah, this is what I do. I'm happy to fix it for you. Let's do that, and I'll save you some money. It's like, no, we don't think you you know, it was really weird to have them lose faith in you like that. So I said, well, make a deal. I've never done this in my career, never. So I make a deal. If I fix it, and if it's satisfactory to you, dinner is on you. So for those of you who know Milwaukee, it was at Bacchus, and the only drag was they chose the wine. So, you know, it wasn't a matter of rubbing anybody's face in it, it's just for yourself to say, yeah, I could do that. And that's really where a lot of fixing gets done, is in post-production. And again, part of what I do, I work for a really broad group of clients. I have local clients here in Milwaukee, I have regional clients around the state, and I do national work from time to time as well. And occasionally, you're doing a very simple session, and it's supposed to be just very simple voice tracking, and all of a sudden somebody says, well, can you do something else? Do you have availability? It's like, well, yeah, there's no such thing as no. We just did, have you heard of the movie Monsters, Inc.? Okay, well, it was turned into a TV show called Monsters at Work, with the original cast, believe it or not, which is John Goodman.
Billy Crystal?
Billy Crystal, thank you very much. Anyway, so Disney had booked me to do Bob Uecker. Bob Uecker was in town, and I worked with him in the past. He used to do the Miller Lite spots back in the 80s. Anyway, and all he was going to do is just cover some of his existing lines and just pick them up again. And you know, he's 80, he's up there, but man, you know, he's still every bit as vibrant as he always was. So anyway, they started off the session. We did a few things, and they said, you know what? We got a couple of changes with the character in the animation. We're going to redo his entire script, which is about 30 pages. Now, not all him. That was the entire script from the show. And it's just a matter of, and I'm dealing with 9 people via Zoom. So the first thing you think when you're doing the session, oh my God, this is going to be 72 people with different opinions. And they were extraordinarily professional. One person, he filtered all the commentary. And Uecker is a complete pro. 2.5 hours later, we had it all done. And you know, I made a couple of bucks, and this was done via Source Connect as well, and Zoom. So that's a lot of what I do. It's not just fixing audio, but it's fixing situations and that sort of thing. So what else was I going to talk about? Software revision. Oh, yeah. Because the nature of my business being working with primarily advertising, I've never done this, but I always want to change my business card and not say audio engineer. I want to say revisionist. I don't know if anybody does advertising in here, but it's nothing but revising, and something that was supposed to be done last Thursday is now due on Wednesday, but they're not going to approve it until the following Wednesday, and it's a hurry up and wait situation. And constant fixing, constant changing, you never know what's going to happen, whether you're going to bring the talent back in, whether the music needs to be changed. We just had a client recently who's the producer, for whatever reason, chose a piece of music that was not cleared music. I'm sure you're all familiar with cleared music. And we use library music. I primarily use APM, but I use other beds, and I create my own because I'm a musician as well. And the piece that this guy chose, and I don't know why he did, but it was a $35,000 piece. The piece was public domain, but the recording was not. I'm sure you're all familiar with the difference in mechanical and synchronization. So we had to go through that and basically rip the piece, and I work with a music guy who does that for me. And the piece, and for those of you who don't know, rip the piece, create something very similar, not exactly the same, so we all stay out of jail. Not that anybody would go to jail for that, but. So, the point is that took 4 weeks for something that was due, this is what would have been due in early October, and it just got approved 2 days ago. So this is kind of the nature of my work. So revisionist is what I really am. And again, editing is the biggest thing for me. It's the most fun because I can do anything I want. And my favorite thing is doing exactly what I did in that story I told you, is inserting words where people aren't necessarily saying that word. We do it to camera. We do ADR from time to time. Are you familiar with ADR? Automatic dialogue replacement. We're replacing dialogue on camera. We used to have the Culver's account, Culver's Restaurants. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. And Craig Culver, who's the president of Culver, used to come in all the time and read spots for radio and sometimes TV. And Craig Culver is a classic Wisconsin boy where he has no consonants at all. Does not say T's or D's or anything like that. And you don't want to make the president of a company sound silly, so myself and our main video editor, I'm in a group. I'm an independent company. I'm in a group company called Mainly Editing, which is 2 video editors. So myself and one of the video editors would go in there and we would be Craig Culver to finish his T's and D's. And they're just subtle edits. and there's something nobody will ever know about, but we know about it. And when it airs, we're looking at it going, yeah, we fixed it. We did what we're supposed to do. We took that challenge. I have actually a couple times snuck in words as a woman, believe it or not. And you know, it's kind of one of these things, if I have a problem with the spot, if the word's mispronounced or whatever, I'll go in there, I'll use the tools I have, raise my pitch, play with it, try and listen to it, and try and get close. It doesn't need to be perfect more often than not, because if it's one word going by, it's very subliminal. And here's the fun about this kind of thing when I play it to clients. If I say, I've had to make a change in the spot, here's the spot, play, they listen. Oh, sounds good, good. Okay, now I'm gonna play it for you again. Just tell me if you hear anything you don't like. Play it again, they're like, no, I'm very happy with it. Then you point it out to them.
Don't ever do that.
No. But you have to. You gotta come clean. Oh, wow. And it depends on which side of the fence they're on. Sometimes they'll be like, yeah, that's great, we love it. Oh, no, we can't do that. Let's bring the talent back in. So the goal is to make it as good as we possibly can. I don't want to ramble all day for you here, so what else? I've worked for everybody from NPR, Comedy Central, Northwestern Mutual, Sargento, all kinds of people. And I've done a little bit of film work, not a ton of it. I also do an audio podcast. I've been doing it for 13 years. This is my own gig. It's a wine podcast, so if there are any wine lovers in the room, talk to me afterwards. Give me your email address. It's the longest running wine podcast online, 13 years. And what I do is interview winemakers. For a change, it's not me talking, it's them talking. And I've had the honor to interview some of the top people in the business all over the planet, which is great. Sadly, for the last 18 months, I have not been able to travel except for this trip to Las Vegas, which the business part was for the podcast, interviewing the winemaker. And it's also a great challenge because I'm dealing with all kinds of different scenarios. I'm interviewing in cellars and wine caves and places where there's all kinds of noise, and it's fun because it's another challenge, but it's one of my passions. I've been very lucky to bring these things together. Okay. Anyway, what can I answer? Is there any questions I can answer for anybody in terms of...
What program should we use to get rid of wind noise on our microphone?
That's probably, excuse me, that's probably the hardest noise there is to get rid of. First thing I'd suggest is playing with EQ at certain frequencies, sometimes around 300, maybe 200 hertz, depending, because sometimes it can be more mid-rangey. Isotope can help with wind, but the one negative thing about isotope is there is a trade-off. Sometimes you might lose a little bit of your basic audio quality that you may not want to lose. Or if you do lose it and you put more EQ on top of it after you fixed it, you end up bringing the noise back. I've had over 40 interns in the time I've owned my business. And the first thing I tell them, no matter what's happening, record the best you possibly can. Record with a lab in the right place. Record where it's going to be the least amount of noise. Good audio in the beginning, there's no substitute for it. I do music on the side from time to time, putting the mic on the drums. You can record drums in just about any kind of room and make them sound good as long as you put the right mics in the right place. So it's not a great answer because you picked one of the worst ones to ask, so I don't know if that helps you. But isotope
That's the one we deal with.
Pardon?
See, that's the one we deal with.
Yeah, I get it. I deal with it as well. I deal with it a lot. In fact, I'm in the middle of, I worked on a series of horse videos. My girlfriend's a horse trainer. We shot some videos down in Florida. And even though we shot in an enclosed arena that had open sides, we were picking up a lot of wind. So it's just a matter more than anything else, testing with EQ. Keep running it through different filters and see which sounds best. Sometimes you'll maybe overemphasize the upper mid-range to make it pop a little bit more and make the EQ less or the wind less noticeable, or just run music underneath it so nobody notices. Yes.
Okay, I probably doubled the plant life in this room, but I keep hearing, like you just said, well, play with it in EQ, play with the highs, play with the lows, play with the mids, and check this frequency, that frequency. How do we learn this? Where do we start out? Because you tell me, you know, play with the lows. I don't know what the hell a low is.
Sure.
And it's like, I know if I interviewed you in this room right now, I got this goofy fan to deal with.
Right.
And all I do, and I don't know what I'm doing, I have other responsibilities, but audio is very important to me.
Right.
I go into my Adobe, I click this button, denoise, and then that sounds good enough to me. I want it better. But explain EQ, high, low, medium, in layman's terms, if you could.
Sure, I'll be happy to. Let me just back up for one quick sec. I did 35, I did booming and lavalier work, 35 millimeter film back in the 80s and 90s. I stopped doing that when I opened my studio because I didn't have the time to do it. And the first thing I did was every room I walked into, you just walk in and listen to it and evaluate it. And yes, HVAC is the biggest problem. And if it's possible, I would beg, plead, borrow anything to get somebody to shut it down. Not always easy, you know, but more often than not, depending on the level of the shoot you're doing, if it's something important, you can get it shut down. Sometimes you have to wait for it to be shut down. When I do my podcast, often if I'm in a cellar, cellars are noisy. If I'm in maybe a tasting room, I'm going to get a chiller. I'm going to get something like that making noise. I do everything I can. Audio people are control freaks. We try to control our atmosphere as much as we can. So I'm asking everybody to shut everything off we possibly can. Fluorescent lights, you know, that kind of thing. There's such a problem, especially if you got ballast issues. So just to go back to this idea of getting pure audio as best as you can. And to your point before, while I am a shotgun mic fan, I prefer shotgun mic 9 times out of 10, you can almost always get better audio, excuse me, of a lavalier because of the proximity. It's going to have a lot more rejection. You're not going to have as many problems with that kind of thing. But to EQ, I don't know how basic I need to go. Let me just go back to it real quick. Our hearing goes from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. Are you familiar with what cycles, what hertz are at all in any way, shape, or form? Okay, and forgive me if anybody, I'm not trying to dumb it down, just want to make sense for you.
Dumb it down for me.
Every frequency relates to a tone, to a sound. So 20 hertz, generally most of us don't hear. 50, maybe 100 hertz is the average sound we hear in the low end, in the bass. You go to concerts, to many events nowadays, they have subwoofers. A lot of that's kind of more psychoacoustic. It's not really true bass. You're more feeling it than hearing it. You're going up into the upper end. A cycle, hertz is measured in a sound wave. How many times it vibrates per second? 20,000 is our high end. So it's very high, very bright. Most of us can't hear 20,000, especially around my age. Excuse me. Different tools I work with facilitate EQ in different ways. One particular EQ I work with is made by Focusrite. It's graphic in terms of how you see it. It's not graphic EQ, it's parametric. I'm getting confusing here, sorry. You have a simple line, and you have the ability to up the gain or drop the gain. You have the ability to choose your frequency. 300 is one we use a lot. We play with that a lot. 300 hertz is a very common, noisy, problematic frequency. You have the ability to broaden what we call the bell curve, which looks like, oddly enough, a bell, imagine that. And that shows how much of that frequency you're eliminating or you're adding, or how little you're going to be taking away. With those three tools, graphically I can see how I'm affecting this equalization. Am I making sense? So, but it depends on your tool. As an example, Pro Tools has something like this that comes stock. All the Pro Tools stock stuff is crap. So you don't see much. It's strictly using your ears. And in the end, that's what it's all about, is using your ears. But if you have something graphic that you can see, it's going to help you play with those frequencies and understand the connection between 300 hertz and why it affects things. It just seems to be a frequency where a lot of sound just kind of gets mucky and just junky. And you can, especially with lavaliers, and you pull that frequency out and all of a sudden, voila, you've got a clean sounding voice. Is that any degree of help for you at all?
It is, I guess. So if we were to come in after recording you with a shotgun mic, and we got this fan going, where would we start at in EQ? 300?
I would start at probably 300, work my way more upward than downward. What's nice about a lot of these tools is they have multiple levels of this. It's not just the one frequency. You can go to different frequencies and work with them and see which combination works best. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, and one more last point, sorry. Interesting thing about EQ, just like compression and reverb or delay, is it has a dual purpose in life. It has a creative purpose, especially music, where you're going to brighten up a voice, make it sound sexier, cooler, hotter, funner, whatever it might be. But it has a practical purpose when we do ADR. If we're trying to replace dialogue that's done in the field, we're going to remove a lot of bottom end for purpose, make it match existing outdoor EQ or existing outdoor sound. You're doing that, in this case, it's a purposeful thing rather than a creative thing. So It might be removing it, it might be adding it. And that's important to remember. And more often than not, you're going to be removing rather than adding. It's a real big rule to remember because people sometimes get fanatical with EQ going, I need to add more, I need to add more. No, take it away. Does that help?
Yeah.
Question.
Yes, sir.
Explain how you would use ambient audio in the final edit underneath somebody's sound to blend in, mix it out,
Excuse
get
me?
rid of some of the HVAC you couldn't peak out
Sure.
with.
In my days when I did, I mean, again, I haven't done field audio per se, other than for my podcasting years. We would do a shoot, and we would just, when it was possible, call quiet on the set, which is almost impossible, just to get 10, 15 seconds of ambient audio with the lav, with the lav, and with the shotgun. And the editors were very happy for that, because if you run into sections where I talk and there's big gaps between me talking and maybe there's noises that are happening, you take that ambient audio and you fill in the gaps with that. The key to that is also in most programs like Pro Tools is using crossfades so it becomes less visible. And when you do a crossfade with a piece of ambience, you want to put that crossfade as close to the actual audio as you can so it becomes less noticeable. It's a real interesting fact about working with crossfades, which I do love. You know, with tape, I used to love editing tape, but working with crossfades in a program like this, it's incredible power where you can have a major difference between some ambient sound. Ideally, you want to get ambient sound with the talent, with all the physical bodies in the room, so it's similar. Here, if you get these close, it becomes very subliminal. It's like a little card trick, if you will. It's a lot of fun. So again, does that help you? Yeah. We use it a lot.
But physically, I mean, when you hear it in your headphones and your studio speakers, whatever you're mixing with, you're putting an underlying track in those gaps of the same ambient audio in order not just to fill it, but does it counter that noise in any way?
I don't put it in a separate track, I put it on the same track and
No.
use the crossfades. If I'm ADRing, if I've got somebody in the studio doing a dialogue replacement, then I use it underneath.
Many of us don't get into Pro Tools, we just
Sure.
use Adobe Suites.
Sure.
And we'll slip in a crossfade or I will put a second audio track under that of that waterfall or whatever in order to ease it up and fill those gaps. Like if you were to cut audio in your studio, then I needed to insert that into my
Exactly.
whole piece that was supposed to be recorded by the waterfall.
Right.
I would use ambient.
Yeah, if it's on a second track, the only thing you have to be careful of is that you're not doubling your background noise so it becomes obvious. So
Yeah.
then you dip that audio. I have not worked with Adobe exactly. You just dip it down a little bit so it becomes more subtle. The key to this, above all else, when you do an edit, don't look at your screen. Don't look at your waveforms. Pay no attention to that stuff. Close your eyes. Listen. When I'm tracking people, especially when we're doing simple short pieces, and we're having somebody that's having difficulty getting through a piece, about the second time I'll close my eyes. And people say, well, Ray's falling asleep again. Best part about it is they don't know. And it's also the great thing about working with your back to people. It's just wonderful that way. But the point of it is you're not focusing on what you see. That's the only drag about working with these visuals, is sometimes we forget to use our ears. And when you're using your ears, you're going to hear things that pop that may not have popped when you were looking at them or focusing on something else. I hope that was some kind of help.
Do you always mix with headsets?
Never. Oh,
Never.
no. Never.
Always.
Never. Oh, no. It's against the law. Never. Sorry.
And that's your environment. Our environment may be an open edit suite with 3 other people working
Sure.
next to you, and you have to.
Yeah, let me just kind of cover that for a sec. I taught for about 5 years, and my students used to do that. It used to make me crazy, and it's because I came from a music background. I did 10 years of music before I went into post-production. And if you mix on headphones, your mix is going to be completely different than what you'll listen to on monitors. It depends on, there you go. It depends on your audience. If your audience, everybody's going to listen. If you're doing like a walk-through tour at the zoo, yeah, that's okay. That's the end source. But if it's going to be on anything from an iPhone to a pair of speakers, that mix is going to be wrong. It's going to be incorrect because you're listening to it at close proximity and you're not getting the reality of the room and how that's going to affect it. With mixing music, you can't mix on headphones. You'll listen to it afterwards and go, oh my God, you know, things will be so out of position. So first thing I'd say is if any way, shape, or form you can mix on speakers, please do. If you have to mix on headphones, pull them off and reference it to the speakers every now and then. Double checking, double referencing, and again in music, I mean, you know, we do a mix, happy with it, play with it for a couple of hours, then we run out to our cars and listen to it. It's kind of what we still do. And it goes back, you know, as long as I can remember. So.
What kind of studio speakers do you use? Because every speaker is different. So if you have a speaker that's heavy on bass and you're mixing to it, but then you listen to it on a smaller speaker, all of a sudden it just sounds like crap.
Part
So
of that
what do
is-
you use?
Yeah, part of that's developing an ear and not developing a house ear, which is a real problem. Winemakers develop what they call house palates sometimes if they don't go out and taste other wines, if they just taste their own wines. So I use Genelec 1030, 1029s, 1030s? 1030s. They're, in my opinion, the best studio speakers ever made. I lucked into them from a studio in Detroit years ago. I've used them for about 20 years. I'd have to double check that model number. I'm sorry, I haven't looked at the model number in a long time. I have found as I get more experienced in life, which is a nice way of saying getting old, I've forgotten model numbers, which is like as a kid I could name anything. So these Genelecs are great because they're flat as a pancake. They do not color. You don't want monitors that color the sound. You can't use consumer speakers in a studio. If you do, you're going to have problems with these monitors coloring your sound. Great example is these headphones made by Dr. Dre. They're bass heavy. Can't mix on those. Thank you. Again, you're going to be hearing bass that doesn't exist. Or more importantly, you mix on those. My students ran into this because that's what they did and that's what they listened to. Then they play it back and it was all really high on the tinny because they were being lied to. Coloring sound is the worst thing in the world you could do. In the studio, we remarkably use very little EQ. It is more of a tool to fix something, less of a tool to enhance something because, again, ideally we try to do it right. In my studio, believe it or not, too, in my studio, I use a shotgun microphone. In audio studios around this country, it fascinated me. I opened in 1997, and in 1998, a friend of mine said, I was using a Neumann, I think 103 or something like that, and a friend of mine said, have you ever tried a shotgun? I'm like, wait, shotgun in the studio, what are you, nuts? And he goes, no, I know a lot of voiceovers I know are using them. I said, why don't you try mine, see what you think. Interesting thing about large diaphragm microphones and different kind of microphones is they all kind of have their favorite people. There's a well-known microphone, I'm sure some of you heard of it, it's called the Neumann U87. It's one of the best-known microphones in the world. It doesn't like everybody. I used to work for a studio before I opened my place up, where my boss was a former radio guy, and he was used to dynamic mics. His voice worked well with dynamic mics. This is a condenser mic, and he was awful on it. I could never tell him that. It was okay, but to my ears, it just wasn't that match. And I use a Sennheiser 416, which is a common known shotgun mic that a lot of people use. And I tried it for a week and I was done. That was it. I got 3 of them now. They're the best mic in the world. I see 99% of the people I work with sound great on it. And if they don't, I go back to one of my other microphones. I think I got off on a tangent there, did I?
What was that microphone again?
It's the Sennheiser 416, P48. They're about roughly $1,200.
Yeah, and not the
So.
cheap ones.
Yeah, well, nothing good is cheap.
You get what you pay for.
Yeah, what's nice though is if you look for them, you can find them used, and the great thing about microphones to audio people, they're jewelry. They generally keep their value, or they drop minimally. So, you know, I've got a larger bank because I do music from time to time, but I like to be able to have the diversity. I never pull a 40 or 16 out of the booth, virtually never. 1 or 2 people come in occasionally, you know, I'll have to pull something else out, but, and that's not a matter of laziness, because trust me, I can be as lazy as the next guy, but if somebody sounds bad, I gotta fix it.
What will you use for shotgun in the field?
416.
Just that check.
Yeah, there's another one, and again, I'm blanking on the name. It's a real fun one to work with because it's got a swivel head on it.
Blue?
No, I'm not a big fan of blue mics, sorry. I've tried all of them. No, this is a well-known shotgun microphone you're talking about.
Yeah.
And it's nice because it has a swivel neck, so you can get into a weird situation. Cars, really nice if you're micing somebody in a car because you need to get it at a weird angle. But shops. Thank you very much. Shops. Favorite shops. But yeah, 416 is my favorite. You know, you've got the squirrel's tail and all the other stuff with it. But again, the only stuff I use those extra things for is when I'm doing my podcast.
If I may continue on that, guys, sorry.
Sure.
Commanding this. Lavaliers.
Countryman. No, what is it?
The
Countryman's a while.
second?
I have one. Boy, I have one.
Seconds or Countrymen?
Countryman's good. There's one particular one I really love. A friend of mine in Milwaukee here has been doing more film than I'd ever dreamed of doing and video in the field. And he turned me on. I used to use a tram. Everybody's familiar with a tram? I always had good results with that. But I went to this mic and Electrosonics. Thank you very much.
Really?
Love it. Absolutely love it. And then they use a really nice high-end wireless system that I can't remember again. I'm so sorry. It's a fun system. What's really nice about this one is it searches out frequencies. If you're in difficult situations and you can't find a frequency, this thing does it both automatic or manually. And I just can't remember the name of it. So, more questions? Anything? Yes, sir.
Yeah. Maybe, if you wouldn't mind, could you tell us in a situation where you've had a recording and you got back and realized that something went wrong and maybe a success story of how you were able to fix it in a process?
Oh, I've never had anything that's gone wrong with me.
Consummate pro, right?
How much time you got?
Yeah.
You know, it's funny. When I do my podcast, I record on a Sound Designs portable recorder, about this big. It's an 8-channel unit, which kills me. You know, used to use Nagras, for those of you who remember Nagras, that weighed 1 million pounds and were about $10,000. It's made here in Wisconsin. Just got bought out by another company. It is probably the most commonly used field audio unit out there, and it's phenomenal. And this particular one is made so nice that you can mount it on your tripod as well as with like an SLR camera and have it all together there. It's fantastic. But one day, there's a couple problems I've run into with it. Number one, if you don't keep the software updated, occasionally it goes on strike. And I had that do that to me once. Luckily, I had a little Zoom unit that backed me up because I always carry a backup. Even in the days of the Nagra, I used to take a DBX cassette deck with me. I did have it not record a channel one day, channel 2. Just for one segment. To this day, I have no idea what happened. And again, I like to look at myself saying, well, if you cut me in half, there's a lot of rings inside me. I've been around for a while. How did this happen? What I do when I record again for my podcast, I run through the sound design, and then it's run into my SLR camera, so the SLR is picking up both channels as well. And I'm never doing more than me and another person at a time. So that saved my rear. And yeah, we run into distortion. You know, that's not unusual with other people. I never record distorted audio, ever in my entire life. That's what I got Isotope for. Man. I'd have to think about that for a while of solving situations. We ran into one, it was close to a year ago. It was kind of one of these, it was kind of a mock, it was a real commercial, but it was a, you know, kind of a 1-800 type thing with a guy behind a counter, like an insurance thing. And we had to ADR the whole thing because it would have been a good thing to bring along. Either there was some noises on the set that were problematic, or the room was very echoey, which I think that's what it was. We just simply ADR'd him, which the client balked at first. And that's a tough sell for people, because they have to bring the talent back in, they got to pay money to do it. And I look at them and say, well, you've got two choices. I like to think of myself as a magician. I'm not. You know, you can only do so much, even in this day. And that's one of the problems I'm sure you've all run into, is people expect you to pull a rabbit out of your hat, and you can't. So you just say, well, you know, let's get the talent back in, and you got to bite the bullet. But you know what? If I had a nickel for every time copy had to be revised, I'd be a millionaire. Where somebody has to come back in. You know, my worry as we go into the future is AI. How much that's going to affect what we do? Because I've heard a lot of AI voice, and it's awful. It's disappointing. It has no heart, has no life. But I don't control what happens in the future. Questions? More questions? Yes.
With the ADR, we had a situation last winter, a big production in a large auditorium, and then the guy pronounced the person's name wrong a number of times.
Oh, it's never happened before.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Well, so, you know, afterwards, I'm like, that guy's name is wrong, you know, and so that they had to bring the person back in who spoke that. We couldn't recreate the whole thing because this was a big production, and then we're bringing one guy back in an empty auditorium. How do you get around that? What special tools do you use? And keep in mind that we are under, like, budget
I've been there.
constraints.
Yeah.
We don't have the dollars to put into fancy stuff, but how do we get around that?
Well, there's a couple of ways to do that. Number one is or what has had people check names on scripts before they read them. But it's funny, I'm a real stickler for pronunciations because I do a lot of tracking. I'm listening to the radio this morning. It's a program on NPR about veterans, not about veterans. I'm listening to a college professor say the word veteran about 120 times, and the hair is going up in the back of my neck. Who here is from here? This town? Where are you from?
Menominee Falls, West Bend area.
Okay. Well, what city are we near?
Milwaukee.
Thank you. No, you aren't.
Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Makes me crazy. Maybe because I'm not from here. But it's also because you should say the names right. There's no such thing as a veteran. It's a veteran. So your question. So there's a couple ways you can handle that. Number one is, like I said before, the subliminal way is you have, let me back up to ADR for a moment. I've worked with some actors who've come through town. We had Sean Astin come through a couple years ago to do ADR for a film. And in the old days, if you've ever seen films of people doing ADR, they're in a big studio with a screen, with time code. We don't have to worry about time code as much anymore. The computer makes things a lot easier. In fact, I can't even remember the last time I've had to be concerned with time code. Because what we'll do is we'll play the audio back in the actor's head, and they'll read with it, so they can match the lines. They don't even really need to see themselves. In fact, truthfully, it's easier for them to do ADR by hearing what they did versus seeing what they did, because our brains don't work that fast, and there is a certain amount of latency that comes with computers as well. So number one is I would have them read the full line, or as much of the line as possible, with that bit of audio, so they duplicate it. So you got two choices here. Number one is, if you have them read a full sentence or more, use the full sentence, because it's usually easier to let that seep in when people listen. They won't notice the change maybe as much, or just chop the word into it. And again, if it's really different, if it sounds different, you can usually fake it to some degree.
Sure.
Again, it's subliminal. And more importantly, like somebody said before, don't tell them you did that. You know, I'm not trying, you know, it's a funny thing. As a music engineer originally, my hero was a guy named Jeff Emmerich, who engineered a lot of the Beatles recordings. An amazing guy, and I was very lucky enough to meet him just before he passed away. But when I read his book, he talked about, he was doing a session, he was doing a playback for a classical piece once. And the conductor was going to come in to listen to the piece, and the producer came to Jeff before the session. He said, look, do me a favor, it's really important, at 2 minutes, 5 seconds, keep an eye on your clock, do me a favor and clear your voice. Loud. And he's like, really? Yeah, just do as I say. So the conductor comes in, listens to the piece at 2 minutes, 5 seconds, just like nothing happened. Well, there was a mistake there, and the producer didn't want to redo it because he didn't have the budget to do it. And when I read that, I laughed so hard because when I started in music, I did that all the time with band mixes. You know, you don't want to cheat anybody, but there are sometimes you have nowhere to go.
Well, the playing back the audio made sense, and I don't know why we didn't think of that before, but you're exactly right, because then we're matching just as audio
Exactly.
with the video that we already shot, and hello, you can see, and it was terrible.
Yeah, as I said, I've done a lot of ADR that way, both, again, for commercial work and that kind of thing, and I've had people ask me to be able to send time code down through ISDN. It's very painful to do that, especially because of latency issues and then rewiring and all that. But when they read along with it, you know, and again, when I've talked about doing these T's and D's, these consonants on reads, that's how we do it too, because we have to match them. It has to match, and you do it a couple times and you can figure it out. And most programs will do a loop. You can loop a few times till you get it right. Yeah.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Any more questions at all?
When you're miking voice with that shotgun, are you close miking?
It varies. When I'm doing like my interviews with the podcast, I'm 180 degrees. I'm on this side where I'm at, you're there. I'm about there. This is the measurement. It's from that movie, The King's Speech. I stole that from there. When I tell people, it's funny because I'll tell people, this is where I want the distance from the mic, and they'll stand like 10 feet away. It's like I'm giving them the... It's there to the mic is good for a booth. And if I'm shooting in the field, I'm whatever the cinematographer or the cameraman wants me to be. I try to get in as close as I can. I have been yelled at by a couple of major directors doing that, so you don't want to get yelled at by a guy who's got 3 cameras operating and that kind of. So I try and get as close as I can. I will occasionally come from below if it's practical. Just depends.
If you have a second mic, you obviously have to consider the distance
Yeah.
from the first to the second.
What I always did when I was doing field work is always had a shotgun and always had a lab. Always, always, always. Doing film work, always. It covers my rear. And when field guys send me audio, I'm so grateful. Again, I want to use a shotgun, but if I can't, if there's a problem, the lab saves my butt every time. You can always EQ it and make it sound better.
But you can't play them together because of the
Oh,
phasing.
no, you'll be phasing issues. Yeah, and the same with two mics, you have to be really judicious about that. I'm impressed when I see a lot of film guys doing that.
Yes.
Yeah. I've never had to work with that very often. But having that lavalier, you know, and the key is where you put the lavalier. I mean, I'm sure you guys all done this. I've stuck lavaliers underneath collars here, but that can be dangerous because of noise. You get a little bit of a, you know, phasing thing going on. This is my favorite place. I love when somebody wears a black coat. It's perfect. You can't see it except for this big wire hanging here. I've stuck lavs in people's hair. Your hair is perfect. And what's cool about hair, especially if you're outside, is the natural windscreen. It works perfectly. We had to do a shoot, and bear with me on this. It was a demo for an advertising client. It was a man talking on camera in a suit. The scene changes to where he's naked, and then he's a skeleton. It was for a medical thing. I forgot what it was about. And thankfully, he was covered when he did the naked section. But I had to have a mic on him. So what am I going to do? Any thoughts? I want to add to the fact that he didn't have a whole heck of a lot of hair.
Behind here.
There you go. Just behind his ear right here. It was astounding how good it sounded. And of course, we shoot to the blind side of the camera with the audio. So we don't have that too much problem. It's not always perfect, you know, and not every scenario works, but most do. I've never had a problem with it. So, and the best, I went to a seminar in Chicago years ago. It was the best seminar I ever went to. It was Sennheiser put it on. There were these guys who've done, two guys who've done all kinds of film work. And one of them was a guy who did Platoon. And we're all like, how did you do the scenes where they're dollying along and they're all running through the jungle, they're all talking to each other? It's like, oh, that was easy. We just stuck their mics in the tip of their helmets and put the transmitter on top. It's like, oh, I never would have thought of that. It was so cool, and it sounded great. I've tried it with cowboy hats from time to time. That works pretty good. It's fun stuff, man. We get to do some very fun stuff in this business.
Tuck it in a knot of somebody's tie?
No, I've never done that.
Yeah.
No. The biggest issue with this stuff is, is one is people who hit their chest. You've all dealt with that. Oh, I'm sorry, I just did that to you. And the other is any kind of movement, so you got to be careful. There are little devices that are made, they're little tents that you can buy that are made to be hidden in certain places. I've constructed a couple myself with felt and that sort of thing, but you're kind of playing the odds.
Real quick, will you
Yes.
do moleskin tape right to chest?
Yeah.
And do you feel like, you pick up that bone resonance?
Depending. It depends on the person, but I've done it. I've never had a major problem with that. I'm being told I have to be done talking, which everybody be grateful for. Everybody, thank you for your questions very much. Thank you.
Fill out your orange slips.
Oh yeah, fill out your own.